So the government is promising to look out for workers and businesses affected by the COVID-19 outbreak as we continue to chart the path of this outbreak and see where it goes. Government's getting lots of advice on what to do. Let's get a little more of that advice, this time from Dan Kelly. He's the president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, representing 110,000 members across this country. He joins me from Toronto. Dan Kelly, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me. Okay, first of all, tell me what you're hearing from your members about the fallout from the COVID-19 outbreak. Have they started feeling the economic effects of this yet?
In some sectors, absolutely. Certainly in retail and hospitality, areas that focus often on either tourism or Chinese Canadian or Asian Canadian clients. Some of those Chinese malls that have businesses that are members of CFIB, they're telling me that they're cleared right out of customers. And of course, there's a lot of businesses that are struggling from a supply chain perspective, and they haven't even felt the full after effect of the rail blockades. And now their supplies from China are tied up for a different reason, not because they're stuck in Canada, but because they're slow to come from Asia in the first place. So this is a big double whammy. A whole bunch of businesses already affected, but more than that, a lot of fear and uncertainty, which, as we all know, is an enemy of business stability.
All right, let's walk through some of the proposals you have for the federal government and how it might be able to help. Well, and I should be clear, not just federal government, governments.
Yes.
Small business owners have obligations to their employees at times like this. What are you telling your members about those obligations? What do they need to know as we may get deeper into this?
So that is the top question that we're getting from small business owners is I have an employee that's coming back from Iran or from South Korea or China. What do I do? Because my other employees are a little bit nervous about having this person fresh back from an area that has significant amounts of COVID. That we're telling our members, of course, to make sure that they talk to their provincial employment standards agencies, but that if they do need to put them into quarantine or if they don't want to welcome them back right away, that they do need perhaps to consider whether or not they wish to pay that person during that period of time. And this is, again, where government may be able to step in and help. One area, there are a lot of small businesses that don't offer paid sick time to begin with. So perhaps using the employment insurance system differently may help some of those businesses in the breach.
In what way?
Well, the government could waive the EI waiting period if somebody is either diagnosed with COVID or is in a quarantine period and has no other form of income support. It would be a big expectation for the employer to have to pay them during that period of time, and yet you don't want to have that employee dragging themselves to work if they're sick or there's a risk that they're sick.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues we're hearing, right? Is there are going to be some people that some organizations have paid sick leave to some extent for employees, others don't, but. I mean, that's a big challenge, isn't it? Some employees may want to come to work simply because they need the paycheck and don't have sick leave.
You're absolutely right, especially for in retail and hospitality. Paid sick time is not something that is particularly commonplace. And even those that do have paid sick time, often, unless you're in the public sector, it runs out after perhaps 5 or 10 days. And the quarantine period is often 2 weeks for the disease. So we need to make sure that there are steps that are put in place, and businesses, of course, can play their part in that. But perhaps having a rebate of the sick time during a quarantine period might be something that the federal government wishes to consider through the EI system to ensure that both the business isn't directly affected, but also that the individual that is in quarantine or perhaps is sick with COVID has income support during that period of time too.
Okay, let's talk about the remittance of sales taxes. You've got a proposal, a suggestion on that. What are you asking for?
So, of course, small businesses are huge tax collectors. A lot of people forget that the business community actually collects and then remits the GST or HST to the federal government. And if they're late, even by a couple of days with those payments, they get clobbered with penalties and interest. And in the face of other disasters, other challenges to the economy, the federal government, the Canada Revenue Agency, has provided some leniency in making sure that money does get remitted on time. If you're dealing with an outbreak, you're dealing with a sick employee, or your business has dropped considerably, having some leniency built into the system so that you're not going to get whacked with a penalty or interest charge after 2 days of being late seems like a reasonable proposal. I said the same thing to the provincial finance minister here in Ontario just earlier this morning when we met.
And you've also suggested, look, how about a break from audits if we're dealing with the negative effects of a COVID-19 outbreak? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so again, for many businesses right now, it's business as usual, and we're not suggesting to government that they need to halt any enforcement measures. But there are a host of government agencies, from workers' compensation, workplace safety, federal, provincial agencies that drop in on businesses often on a moment's notice. And if you are up to your eyeballs with either sick employees or your business is way down, it's not the best time to then have a government inspector knocking on your door, chasing you for some paperwork. So ensuring that these agencies do have the flexibility to put these things off for a period when it is more business as usual makes a lot of sense to us. And most government agencies, when we've raised that with them, have done just that. And we're reminding the federal government of ensuring that, and provincial governments, to ensure that flexibility exists.
And what happens if some small or medium-sized businesses, what if they have to shut down completely because of, sickness in their workplace, where, so many of their employees may be quarantined or off sick that they can't actually function? What can the government do for them, or what can governments do for them?
Well, in some respects, it's the creative use of the EI system to perhaps waive waiting periods so that their employees can have income support a lot more quickly without having to wait 2 weeks for that to happen. Ensuring that there is capacity within the EI system to process these claims quickly and get the money out to the people that need it is part of this. But it's not just employers that have somebody that diagnosed with COVID that are facing the problem. A member of ours in Toronto said that supplies the hospitality industry, who supplies hotels with food, said that her business is down 75%. Since the COVID outbreak because of a drop in tourism to the GTA. That's a huge drop, and she may be facing layoffs of some of her employees, not because they have COVID, just because the tourism is not there, that especially from some of the Pacific Rim countries that bring in a lot of tourists to Canada. The same is true of other parts of Canada that do benefit from a lot of tourism. You think of our national parks like Banff, and even heavy Chinese Canadian communities like Markham, Ontario, Richmond, BC. There are some ghost towns out there in certain parts of the country because of either the fear of COVID or the drop in tourism that this has created.
There's always there's lots of anxiety around this, of course. And there's always a desire for answers and solutions as quickly as possible, and there's lots of pressure on the government to deliver that. How satisfied are you to this point for the way they're handling this and the way they're messaging the role they expect to play if this gets worse?
Well, it's certainly better than, I think, the slow response to the rail blockades. The government has been reaching out. We're pleased to see that there is a cabinet committee, and they have a lot of the right ministers or ministries involved in that. So there has been some response, and obviously we're expecting more as we move towards the federal budget, whenever that's going to be. But we're hoping, of course, one of our main messages to the government is let's not make it worse. They're in the midst of a significant increase in the overall tax burden on the business community with the CPP premium increase that just happened earlier this year. Mm-hmm. One of the things we're calling for, Donald Trump just announced in the U.S. that they're looking at payroll tax relief for businesses in the U.S. That's something that I think the federal government should consider. Again, I mean, these are early days. We haven't seen widespread COVID-related problems in Canada, but we do need to prepare for this, and certainly some of the steps that have been taken are at least a helpful beginning to the process.
All right, Dan Kelly, good to hear from you today, and we'll talk again. Take care.
Anytime.